Lee Hamilton's Freedom Medal is made possible by members like you. Thank you.
Lee Hamilton is he's a quintessential Hoosier, which is to say that he's a man of strong opinions, but a gentle demeanor. Shows the ability to stand for things, but not stand against people.
Lee Hamilton is an example for all public servants in our nation of how to put the people's business before their own.
He was respected by people from both parties for two reasons. One, he was a serious legislator who put policy ahead of politics. And secondly, Lee just conducted himself in a way that brought respect for the kind of person that he was.
Lee is very collegial and very, very smart. He is the consummate policy wonk, and he is just by his very nature bipartisan. And those qualities come through the minute you meet him.
Instead of most people feeling like, you've been here long enough, throw him out, with Lee Hamilton, the more you got to know him, the more you loved him.
And to know Lee Hamilton is to like Lee Hamilton, really.
Welcome to the White House, everybody. A bunch of people were saying I was pretty busy today, which is true. But this is a fun kind of busy right here. Today, we celebrate some extraordinary people. Innovators, artists, and leaders who contribute to America's strength as a nation. And we offer them our highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
It's an honor reserved to those who've contributed significantly to world peace or to America's national interests, society, or culture. It's been bestowed upon a wide range of people, from Mother Teresa to Bob Hope, from Rosa Parks to Yo-Yo Ma. But the honor is exceedingly rare. In an average year, only 1 in every 20 million American adults will receive it.
I was not surprised that Lee was nominated for and received the Medal of Freedom. Given his commitment to his job, commitment to the country, I think it was well deserved. Lee dealt with major foreign policy issues that were important to be addressed in a bipartisan way. He was eminently fair in doing that. His service as the head of the co-chair of the 911 Commission was critically important. To have someone of his character and his respect that he had gained heading up that investigation. So he certainly laid down a mark, and I think, in my opinion, well deserved that medal.
I think he was given, I think the first time around they said he'd have 5 tickets. Well, I think there's 9, 10 people there, something like that. So, I don't know who has to okay that, but evidently they must have been his friend.
At its best, Lee Hamilton once said, representative democracy gives us a system where all of us have a voice in the process and a stake in the product. In his 34 years in Congress, Lee Hamilton was a faithful servant to that ideal, representing his district, his beloved Indiana, and his country with integrity and honor. As head of the House Foreign Affairs and Intelligence Committees, he helped guide us through the Cold War and into a new era of American leadership. A man widely admired on both sides of the aisle for his honesty, his wisdom, and consistent commitment to bipartisanship. From serving as vice chair of the 9/11 Commission to making Congress more effective, Lee remains a tireless public servant and a trusted advisor and friend to many.
I think it is a culmination of a lot of things that he did in his life for the life of others. And I think the president was right. Yeah, and he just a great guy. Yeah, deserved it.
Lee Hamilton doesn't seem entirely comfortable with hearing that he deserves anything special, especially the rarest of American civilian honors. At the age of 84, he sat on a stage in the East Room of the White House in November. He looked around at Stephen Sondheim seated next to him, then Steven Spielberg and Barbra Streisand, and he asked himself what he was doing there.
They were a remarkable group. Entertainers, baseball players, mathematicians. I wondered sometimes if I might be out of place, but fortunately we had another politician or two in there. But I came away with a great appreciation for areas of our nation's life that I hadn't had much contact with. Barbra Streisand, she and I don't really have very much in common. Steven Spielberg, had a wonderful chat with him, James Taylor, all of these people that distinguished themselves.
And of course, he couldn't resist a moment with the Say Hey Kid.
I talked with Willie Mays about the catch. A real baseball fan knows what I'm talking about. 1954 World Series, Willie Mays caught one over his shoulder, charging towards the center field fence. He chuckled about it, remembered it, of course. Everybody asks him about the catch, and so did I.
Hamilton grew up admiring the baseball greats. He himself was an athlete.
Lee was a very fine basketball player when he got to Indianapolis. He had been a promising young athlete when we lived in Chattanooga, and the paper, when we left Chattanooga, said, keep your eye on this guy. He's won 4 things on the track field. And when he got to Indianapolis, nobody cared, or Indiana, no one cared anything about the track field. They said, we got a different game up here.
He played for DePaul in college and carried that competitive attitude with him as he began his professional career.
I saw the attraction of politics, the energy, the enthusiasm, the competitiveness of it I liked. Having had an athletic background, I like competition. And I found that I really enjoyed it, so I brought to it a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of energy.
Hamilton had gone to IU to be a lawyer, but he quickly got bored and restless.
I had figured out that I wasn't going to be the world's greatest lawyer, and my interest in policy began to grow after I left law school. And I figured out that if I was going to have an impact on policy, I had to get into politics.
While working in private practice in Columbus, Indiana, Lee Hamilton got his start in politics.
I began my campaign by visiting Democratic precinct committeemen in the counties of the 9th Congressional District. I went out to see them. I'd join them for a cup of coffee. I'd knock on their door. I'd meet them at the lodge. Wherever they were, I'd go to see them. So I built up a kind of a grassroots support, and that was the way politics worked then, less so today, but it was real shoe leather.
Hamilton won that race, part of the Democratic landslide that year.
We were surprised when Lee first decided he might try to enter public life, and when he succeeded in that first time, well, I guess it caught, and he stayed for a while. So of course that brought a lot of new elements to our life together in the family.
In Congress, he championed bills in response to what folks in his district told him on the campaign trail. That dedication to his constituents earned respect throughout his district, and ultimately 17 terms, 34 years on Capitol Hill.
He says, look, I'm a politician a short period of every 2 years. The rest of the time I represent all the people. And while that campaign's going on, we still represent those people.
The very core of representative democracy is the relationship between the elected official and the voter. It's a two-way educational process. The elected official educates the voter on a lot of issues, but it works the other way around. The voter educates the elected official. That is the core of representative democracy. That's what makes it unique and makes it function properly.
Whether it was for county fairs, parades, town hall meetings, Hamilton frequently made the trek back to his district.
Well, Lee Hamilton, I think, was elected to Congress when I was about 5 years old. And my hometown was his hometown, Columbus, Indiana. So as I grew up with an interest in politics, and my first involvement in politics as a teenager was in the Democratic Party in my hometown. Some of my best memories were when he would come to Columbus North High School and speak to our classes. He wouldn't go fill an auditorium and give a long speech. He'd just come in, take his jacket off, throw it over a chair, lean against the teacher's desk in a government class, and just talk.
He probably for the first 25, 30 years that he was in Congress, he came back on an average of 41 weekends a year. To most, it wasn't congressman, it was Lee. He preferred that, but you know, somebody calls you congressman, you don't stand there and say, don't do that again, I'm gonna call me Lee. But I mean, it was automatic. He walked up and down the streets of the small towns in the 9th District, and it was not uncommon for people to walk up to him and say, hi Lee, how are you? Good to see you today. And incidentally, I've got this problem I'd like for you to work on.
Hamilton established regular lines of communication so voters could reach out to him and direct his legislative focus. He responded personally to letters. At one point, he was sending nearly 30,000 letters each year. He also sent out mailings and newsletters and a nonpartisan weekly look at a specific topic in the form of Washington reports. On Capitol Hill, he took a particular interest in foreign affairs.
So in multitude of ways, I tried to re-energize the Congress to get them more interested in foreign policy. Created all kinds of exchanges, meetings with foreign dignitaries, travel, and I tried to get the Congress to be a partner and a critic of the president with regard to foreign policy.
Hamilton chaired the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, as well as a high-profile committee in the Reagan era that investigated claims of covert trades of arms for Iranian hostages.
Why were these hearings on Iran-Contra held? Well, they were held because of two administration policies. The first was the arms sales to Iran, and the second, of course, was the diversion to the Nicaraguan Contras of the proceeds from those sales. The first policy, the president signed a finding on and forgot about. The second policy, he did not know about it. But these policies contradicted publicly held, long-held public positions of the United States. Our public policy was not to make any concessions to the release or for the release of hostages. But at the time, we were secretly trading weapons to get the hostages back. Our public policy was to ban arms shipments to Iran and to exhort our allies to observe that embargo. Secretly, we were selling sophisticated missiles to Iran.
Hamilton declined to pursue House impeachment proceedings against Ronald Reagan or George Bush during the arms for Iranian hostages controversy, saying he felt the trial would not be good for the country. The decision won him praise from the opposing party.
Let me echo the sentiments expressed by the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Hamilton, and thank him for the privilege of having served with him on the committee. It has been a very difficult task. He's had the most difficult task of all, to preside over a sometimes contentious and confusing process. But I think the committee has in fact produced a product that the House can be proud of.
I conducted a number of investigations, and always I took the role that the first task was to find out what happened. It's amazing how much time we spend in government arguing about the facts. Facts are facts. They're not Republican, they're not Democrat, they're facts. But once you have a common factual base, the resolution of the problem becomes less difficult.
Lee Hamilton, I think, always demonstrated the kind of respect and civility in the Congress that made it possible to find common ground. You know, I've often said that democracy can't thrive without heavy doses of civility. And Lee Hamilton always practiced civility, whether he was chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, whether a strong debate on Capitol Hill. You never had a sense that where he disagreed with an individual that he made it about them, he made it about the issue. And that makes it possible for people to walk off the floor and look for ways that you can work together in the future, even if you might have disagreed on that issue.
He was always interested in giving and taking, if that's what it took to come to an agreement. And you don't have that now. It's not there. It's just not there. Members today don't know one another. That's a crazy statement for me to make, but that's the truth.
But his 34-year career in Congress is only part of what earned him the medal. Hamilton retired in 1999 and founded the Center on Congress at Indiana University's Bloomington campus.
Have you been in touch with her?
Yes. Hamilton's collection of government papers, speeches, and newsletters are neatly cataloged in his office. The center developed out of Hamilton's belief that citizens need to know more about the role of Congress, how it works, and the impact it has on their lives.
I used to ask myself the question, who speaks up and defends the Congress? Well, the fact of the matter is very few people do, even members of Congress. But we have to have more people doing that.
And it's the sense of history that helps people.
If you don't have a robust Congress, you do not have representative government.
And it's the respect for the past, one might argue, or respect for what people have accomplished in the past that helps you.
Absolutely. It gives you a pride. It gives you a sense of self-correction. You understand the country's successes, its failures, and how to correct those failures better. And I think a sense of history can just be invaluable to the public policy person.
The center positioned Hamilton as one of the country's foremost experts on representative government and the leader of a movement to improve civic education. In September 2001, the unthinkable happened. It shook the nation.
Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror.
And the country called on a proven leader.
It impacted every single human being. They began to be more concerned about their own personal safety. They recognized that those oceans, the Pacific and the Atlantic, which had always protected us, could be penetrated by the terrorists.
Hamilton was named vice chair of the 9/11 Commission and tasked with determining first what happened on 9/11 and second, what needed to be done to secure the country against a future attack.
We had 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, all of us partisans. The first step, so simple that it may sound a little humorous, we got to know one another. We learned that I'm a Democrat, the Republicans were not enemies, they were friends, and we had a common problems that we had to try to solve. You cannot force that process. It has to evolve. You have to understand where the other fella comes from, what his bottom lines are, what things he can negotiate on, what problems you cannot solve, what problems you can solve. But you try to make progress where you can. And usually, not always, you can make more progress than you initially think.
The final report found the U.S. government had not taken the threat of al-Qaeda seriously enough, and that the U.S. intelligence work in the 3 years before the attacks was insufficient to even disturb the al-Qaeda plot.
The FBI gathered intelligence on a significant number of organizations in the United States suspected of raising funds for al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups. The FBI, however, did not develop an end game for its work. Agents continued to gather intelligence with little hope that they would be able to make a criminal case or otherwise disrupt the operations of these organizations.
The committee issued dozens of recommendations in areas ranging from homeland security to public diplomacy, 80% of which have been adopted.
I do think there remains a bit of arrogance, frankly, on the part of the federal people that we know it and we'll share with you. Trust us, we'll give you the right information in a timely way. And it is not enough of a two-way street.
In D.C., the night before Hamilton was slated to receive the Medal of Freedom, members of the 9/11 Commission and 9/11 families joined with the people who'd worked with Hamilton during his time on Capitol Hill to celebrate.
Thank you for this great leadership, and you continue to be ours, Lee Hamilton. Thank you very much.
As one of the family members who fought to create the 9/11 Commission, we obviously thought it was incredibly important to have a chair and a vice chair who understood that they had to work together to figure out what had gone wrong and to make sure it never happened again. And Lee Hamilton, we couldn't have asked for a better vice chair. Lee Hamilton is an example for all public servants in our nation of how to put the people's business before their own.
Now, if I hadn't gone to South Bend that time, Tim, you'd be teaching poli-sci at St. Mary's of the Woods, even today.
This is not somebody who puts himself above other people. He is someone who can speak from the heart, speak clearly, succinctly. He didn't need the spotlight on him, and that helped throughout his career, but particularly on the 9/11 Commission.
I think it comes back to really good, I hate to say it, you sound kind of corny saying it in Indiana, Hoosier values, things that we really respect. We don't love the polished and the slick and the long answers, the convoluted analysis of something. Lee talks with common sense and in a straightforward manner. Lee has honesty and integrity flowing through everything he does and says.
On the 10th anniversary of the attacks, he reconvened the commission at Indiana University.
Everybody on either side of the aisle has tremendous respect for Lee Hamilton and what he did, and that made our job much easier. Because when we said something together, they didn't care about this guy from New Jersey, but Lee Hamilton was involved, they listened.
Hamilton still splits his time between Indiana and Washington. He's currently a member of the President's Homeland Security Advisory Council, the CIA External Advisory Board, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Task Force on preventing the entry of weapons of mass effect on American soil.
One of the things I probably admire most about Lee Hamilton is I think the man who went to Washington in the early 1960s was the same man who retired from the Congress as one of the preeminent leaders on foreign policy. That same Hoosier common sense, that same respectful demeanor. And I think that's why he was so universally admired during his tenure in Congress and why he's admired by leaders in both political parties to this day.
What gives me the most satisfaction is that I felt I had a seat at the table on all kinds of difficult policy issues for decades. Our system works with a lot of tables of people participating. There's a table in the Pentagon, there's a table in the White House, there's a table in the State Department, there are tables in the Congress. I always had a seat at the table. I could make my voice heard. I could speak up. I had a chance to defend my point of view. Not every American has that chance.
At Indiana University, Hamilton continues to serve as a professor and distinguished scholar, and an advocate for bipartisanship and effective governance.
His work, I think, to a large degree, it has been a part of his hobby, if that's what you want to call it. I mean, because he doesn't have a workshop at home where he uses hammer and nails and stuff like that. his career, his work is Lee Hamilton?
I think I still have a voice to contribute. I believe strongly in the public dialogue. I believe that's the way representative government works. I would still want to be a part of it to the extent that I can. I don't have the energy I once had, but I have a good bit of energy for a person my age. And as long as I can contribute, think I can contribute, I want to continue to do so.
The Honorable Lee H. Hamilton. A leading voice on foreign policy and national security, his leadership in Congress reflected his profound commitment to preserving the safety and integrity of our nation, and his role in promoting civic engagement has made an impact that will endure for generations to come. Lee H. Hamilton has helped steer the course of American history in a spirit of bipartisanship, and he continues to strengthen the homeland and promote diplomacy.
Lee Hamilton's Freedom Medal is made possible by members like you. Thank you.